Hello, my name's Matthew Harrison. I'm a scientist at the University of Tasmania at Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture. Thanks for joining this webinar. In a previous webinar I talked about GrassGro and modelling sheep and beef grazing systems, and in that webinar we created this lamb example, and so I encourage you to have a look at the previous video. I'll include the link to that video in the comments section down the bottom of this webinar. In this webinar we're going to look at factorials and how we conduct analyses or comparisons of different levels of the same factor within a farm system. So a farm system is basically your climate, your soil details, your pasture, your stocking rate, your management, animal management details, maintenance feeding, production feeding, and your prices and costs. So in GrassGro we have this standard farm systems over the side, and you have your custom farm systems over here that you've created. And then you have your components up the top here from the standard library, which you can drop on a simulation, as well as your custom ones that you've already created there. Now, to create an analysis, we right-click on this on your accepted farm system analysis. If it's not accepted, it'll have an exclamation mark out the side, and you can't create an analysis. When it is accepted, it'll have this icon here. We go to use an analysis. Now we can do a stocking rate comparison, a shearing date, seasonal outlook, their cost price sensitivity, pasture comparison, and so on and so forth. Just to give you an idea of what the stocking rate looks like, it comes up with this orange box. So in contrast to if I double click on this, the green box, which is your actual farm system. An analysis means that I can't actually change the default property, but I can change the factors that I want to look at. So I'll just get rid of that one there. And so for a stocking rate analysis, which is quite simple, it's got your property details, which we've already set in that typical farm system. Then we have the analysis details. So we have the reports that will come up afterwards, and you can modify these, and I'll talk about that in a second. Here is the most important part. You're basically comparing stocking rates. Now you might want to compare a stocking rate of, for example, 5 with another stocking rate of, for example, 10. And then another stocking rate of, let's say 20, just for instance sake. You hit OK. Then you want a historical period or a tactical period. A tactical period is simulating up to a point, having a known point, simulating up to a point, and then getting a distribution of outcomes from that point going forwards. A historical one is simply where you simulate the whole year. So, and then you nominate your period of analysis that ideally is the same as the period that you created your farm system. So if you want that to be different, you can make that different, but just ensure that your climate data is within the bounds of that you put in your farm system. Otherwise it'll be greyed out and won't let you. You nominate whether it's a financial year, excuse me, and then you nominate your report. Then you simply hit analyze, and it's saying analysing factor level 1, so that's this top stocking rate, 5 DSE per hectare. Now it's looking at the second one, 10 sheep per hectare, and in here it's looking at the third one, 20 sheep per hectare. Now it's saying it's generating the report, and it will come up with this stocking rate report because we've told it to bring it up. We just need to wait for a second. While we wait for that to come up, it's probably useful to point out that the stocking rate that's going to come up contains all of these 3 report items here. So they're essentially sheets. So those sheets that I were just talking about, they are actually part of this report that's just popped up. So the key part that's coming up here is it's saying it's comparing the factors that you put in. So 5 sheep, 10 sheep, and 20 sheep. And here we've got gross margin. Now, remembering in the last webinar that I showed, I didn't put costs in, so obviously all of these are 0, but just an indication of the variables that it puts out. So net wool income, total income, shearing costs, and it gives you total expenditures and gross margin. And so in that way, you can compare different stocking rates, which is quite useful. Another important thing to look at is the variability of stocking rates. It's not showing anything there because it's an economic measure. Production summary. This is quite important. I've got a lot more production for 20 sheep per hectare compared with 5 sheep per hectare, but what about variability and sustainability? So that's something important, and we'll look at that in a second. The distribution of weight outcomes from lambs. You've got your annual pasture production for each system. and then it's showing you block graphs of comparison, so ground cover. So obviously your ground cover with a lower stocking rate, long-term ground cover, will be higher than a ground cover for a much higher stocking rate. So in the last video, and the general rule of thumb is we aim for 70% cover in 70% of years, and you can see that even with 20 sheep per hectare, because we've got a feedlotting system in this case, it's above that cover. So it's a very resilient system, and you can see that with the lower stocking rate we've got much higher ground cover in the long term. Then you've got sustainability metrics, live weights of sheep, and a number of different graphs for the factors that you put in. So it's showing you feed budget, it's comparing feed supply, feed demand versus long-term feed supply, rainfall, pasture distribution, stock numbers, live weight of sheep, and you can change what variable, and you've got the actual details of the simulation at the bottom, but you can change what variable and what graph you want to look at there. So you can change, to go to a brief stocking rate, for example, just hit show report. It takes a second to generate. It will come up with the same outputs, but some things will be different. And you can obviously go into that, but it's obviously got an index over here with hyperlinks, so if you want to go to a specific section, you can go to that. If you want to change these, for example, you can't actually change them on here. There's a specific way to do it. I can't actually remember how to do it in this case, but I think it's in the components over here. One of these components is reporting, and you can potentially drop your new reports into there. So you can pull that over there and drop it into your custom report, like so. Then you open it up there. You obviously probably want to rename it custom rate, custom, and then you can either manipulate these, or you can add different variables, or you can do whatever you like. So each of these icons means something different. That means a summary. That means a table of outcomes. This little icon here means a graph, so it's going to have a graph of things. Now in the previous webinar I talked about the variables, so to get another variable you hit select, and then it will come up with the main components on the left, and then in here all the individual variables. So for example, for production, you might want to look at sale weight. You might also want to look at the feed budget for pasture growth and animal intake. It gives you the units and it gives you a description. Hit OK. Then you can nominate the colour, the aggregation on the graph, which is a little bit tricky. You've got this transform thing here in which it's saying data over between these dates, or you could just go quite simple, and then you could go, well, I want to look at the average on here. So it'll take you a little while to play with these two variables and this transform thing here to get the output that you want. So, but this is really just looking at the reporting style and giving you an indication of the variables that you can get. So hit OK. Well, you can't, it's saying you can't do it, so I'll just cancel there. And that's about it. One other thing that we might want to look at is an analysis of a different type. So we just cross that off. We now want to save it. We right click again, we go use in analysis. Now we go farm system choice. So that's the most complicated comparison. To add factors, you right click and go add, add again. So we've got a couple of examples. Now in a farm system analysis we can change multiple things in the comparison. So we might want to change pasture species, double click on pasture species, and we might say, for example, in this one we're going to have a pasture species of the default, so we'll leave that as the control. And now in this one we might want to say, okay, we're going to have a deeper rooted pasture species, keeping the pasture species the same. So we'll change that to 600, for example, which is 600 millimeters. And then you might say, well, if pasture growth is more, my stocking rate might actually be more as well. So we can actually change stocking rate from the default of 14. We might say, okay, we're going to have a higher stocking rate as well. In general, you should only change one factor though, unless you've got a specific farm system that you want to change multiple variables. So in this case, so I just say deeper roots. And this one, for example, I might have shallower roots, so we take that down to 200. and so on and so forth. I'll delete that example because it takes longer. Yes, analyse. So it's analysing the factors over this time period. The longer your time period, the more results you get and the greater the distribution, because it's including more climatic outputs in the result. So it's just creating, and it's going to bring up that second report that I nominated there. And you can obviously say, well, I only want to look at the report between two dates, so you can actually change the reporting date there. So you've got a number of intuitive input parameters to put in there. And obviously now we've got a difference in the output. So now what's it saying here? So it's saying for the control we have an average growth rate of about 80. Deeper roots, well, it doesn't really result in much in the long term, and so it's really an insensitive variable. Now what happens in terms of pasture growth? Well, in some of the good years, yes, we get a peak of a little bit higher, 8,000 kilograms per hectare compared with about 7.5, but in the long term it's not making a lot of difference. You can see these smaller values here are lower. Then you can have a look at some of the emergent properties of the model that come out in other aspects. So you can look at, chilling index to animals, you can look at production, you can look at feed budget, and you can look at a number of different things. I only really want to give a quick taste in this webinar, but you can obviously manipulate a lot of different factors such as animal management, pasture, animal breed, soil type, and climate type. But that's all I wanted to say for today, and thanks very much for watching.